Welcome to Global View. Today we are joined by a powerhouse in conservative politics. As a former White House Director of Strategic Communication, she has been at the forefront of shaping policies and messaging in America. As a host of CPAC, she plays a crucial role in shaping the conservative movement as a whole, advocating for freedom and America First policies. Welcome to the show, Mercedes Schlapp. Thanks so much
Oh,
for joining us.
thank you for having me.
Thank you, Mercedes. I'm very fascinated by your work at the CPAC. Also, as an European Italian myself, at international level, we know that CPAC recently kicked off its international summit, featuring world leaders like Bolsonaro. What are the primary objectives of the summit, and what impact do you hope it will have on the global conservative movement?
Sure. So I have to say, it's CPAC, the International Summit, has become, this is the second year we've done this event, and it's only getting bigger. And part of it is because CPAC now has a global reach. I mean, we do CPACs across the globe, whether in Japan, Australia, Israel, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Hungary. I mean, the list has just continues to expand. And part of it is because we find the commonness, what connects us. And that is the fight for freedom, right? The fight against communism, the fight against globalism, in order to stop the woke agenda, in order to stop the insanity that we've seen happening here in America, that thank God through that Donald Trump was able to win and Republicans to win, in order to stop what we have seen of the leftist propaganda that was really tearing down our country. And so we see this happening across the globe. And one of the things that we end up talking about is how, problems that we're having here in America, there's same problems that they have across the continents, basically. It's the fake news. Where do people go to get their news? It's the woke ideology, where they're indoctrinating our children, or the acceptance of Marxism and communism in these different countries. How do you win elections, right? How can conservative leaders win in these countries, and how do you organize in terms of the grassroots issues that we've seen? We've also seen, for example, the weaponization of our legal and judicial system, something that happens all the time across the globe. Take the case of Brazil, for example, and then that, of course, happening here within the US. So I think for CPAC, it's really become the place to be in order to bring together these world leaders, in order to bring together these conservative leaders and be able to share common practices, to be able to support each other, and to be able to make significant changes in their countries in support of the people and of freedom.
No, that's absolutely wonderful, Mercedes. And Reagan had Thatcher, and based on your global, venues that you're hosting, I think now President Trump has his own allies from Argentina to Italy to Hungary to some Asian countries, and I really think it's those type of leaders and the ideologies that they espouse, and the platform that CPAC has given them to express those ideas publicly and without fear, that's
Yeah.
really allowed the tide the turn. So Thatcher and Reagan helped destroy the Soviet Union. And I think these new leaders that have emerged now are really going to stop the globalist agenda that President Trump started in 2016. So the question I had is, you worked in the White House. You obviously know President Trump very well. How do you differentiate his first term to what you're seeing presently? And do you think how do you think that this could keep MAGA going into the future?
Look, I think I love seeing what we're seeing right now. I think that this
Mhm.
administration is much more organized. I think when you all were involved in the campaign, as was I, it was a lot of a steep learning curve to a certain extent. And I think even for President Trump, as a first-time politician, in understanding who he can trust and understanding who he can bring into his inner circle, knowing what we know now, where the FBI and we've seen our intelligence agencies going after the MAGA people and going after the president and trying to tear people down and destroy their lives. And I know that that's, personal for you all. And and it is for us as well. And it's been a horrible challenge and time for so many of us. And with that being said, facing what we faced during that first term, which was the Russian hoax, which was the media that was literally trying to tear everybody apart and destroy Donald Trump. It was the Democrats trying to impeach Donald Trump and moving forward in that direction as well. And so I think for Donald Trump, what he has gone through in basically surviving the weaponization of the DOJ, of these federal prosecutors who have gone after him, and also then surviving 2 assassination attempts. I mean, you get to a point that you're like, okay, God's on my side. I'm going back in as president, and we've got a limited amount of time to get a lot of things done. And I remember President Trump telling Matt and myself that he hoped it's not too late, that if he were to win this election, this was right before the November election, that he was to win this election, that he would hope that that he wouldn't be too late to solve these very complicated problems that we're seeing that America and the world were facing at the time. And so what you're seeing is a man who is very focused, a man who is determined to work every single hour he can possibly work in order to deliver for the American people, bring peace to the world, and secure our nation. And I think it's really, I just love what I'm seeing coming out of the White House and their aggressiveness and their shock and awe in pushing back on these fake media narratives. And I got to tell you, I see the media running scared. I see the Democrats running scared and not knowing where they're going to shoot next, like what they're going to do next. It's kind of fascinating to watch.
Absolutely. And precisely on the media standpoint of view, you're an expert in communication. You advise the White House and President Trump on these topics. We have seen a brutal targeting, a collusion of the media, mainstream media, with a weaponized Department of Justice. We were assisting to prosecution or better persecution of political targets on a side. On the other side, we had all this fake news giving echo to this fake prosecution. So how do you see evolving the role of the media now that President Trump is back in power and finally can actually give also space to influencers, podcasters, and all the people that took charge of it?
So the media landscape has changed dramatically. And I think it's like programs like yourselves and several other programs where people are saying, you know what, I don't trust the legacy media. I don't trust the mainstream media. I don't trust the leftist media. And it's really impacted their ratings, their numbers. They haven't been able to recover, quite frankly, following the election. And part of it is because they were so obsessed with calling Donald Trump Hitler. They were so obsessed in calling Donald Trump a threat to democracy. And it didn't pan out because the American people were like, okay, you might think he's a threat to democracy, but here's the deal. Like, I can't feed my family because prices are too high. I can't buy a house because my housing price is too high. You know, why are they telling my daughter that my daughter is a boy at school and they want to change her gender? Like, they're going through all of these questions in their minds and they're saying, and you're telling me that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy? I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. And that's why you saw what you saw during this election. And so the media lost even more credibility. And I do think that this opportunity, this rise of social media influencers, of podcasters, of individuals who are basically trying to expose the left, tell the truth, and also give Donald Trump a platform to make his case. I think those are very important voices we need right now.
Thank you.
No, certainly. And I think the Democrats were the key to allowing President Trump to make his case because of how far left and how bizarre their agendas were and their policies really were. So why do you think that the Democrats basically fell on the sword of wokeism and trying to push these various agendas down the American people's throats when they were so alien and so absurd to begin with? I mean, I think obviously the economy that you just mentioned was a massive issue, but I also think that culture, traditions, values, and just what makes America America was under direct threat this past election. And I think that was also a major part of the electoral landslide, the popular vote victory. So why do you think that the Democrats decided to fall on the sword of wokeism? And do you think that they have the ability to recover from this disastrous last election?
That's a great question. And I will tell you something. I do believe, because for the Democrats, climate change, abortion, the woke ideology, it is their religion. Mm-hmm. It is what they truly believe needs to happen. They truly believe that it is really okay to mutilate a child. They truly believe that it is okay to have a late-term abortion. They truly believe, that that, again, Trump and his people are the worst in the world and scum and fascist and horrific. So their problem became that in order and even when he was talking about the economy, they couldn't come up with a good enough answer. Their answer was always like, yes, but abortion rights. That was always their answer. It always turned to abortion. And I was like, okay, abortion's not going to put food on the table. Like, let's be real, people. You got to go to the basics of the cost of living. And then when you're looking at the mental decline of President Biden and the media's not covering it, President Biden can barely stand up for more than 5 minutes. He can barely give a speech. And the media just completely didn't even make a big deal about it. And then you had Kamala Harris, who was the word salad master, who couldn't even put a coherent plan together in place. I'm sorry, millions of Americans said no more. We have to go in a different direction. And for them, I have to say, it was a masterful campaign by President Trump. And the mere fact that he was able to connect to the working American man and woman, in places like Nevada, in places like Michigan, in places like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, was absolutely part of his huge victory. And look, only Donald Trump can do it. He is so masterful at connecting with everyday Americans. He's so masterful at knowing what we need to do to solve the issues. And so that's why you saw this shift even in demographics. You saw more young people voting for him. You saw more Hispanics, more Blacks voting for him. Because I think that they were like this Democrat Party thing where they're obsessed with, gender ideology and abortion and all the craziness. It's not for me. And so they rejected what I call leftist insanity versus what I call common sense, which is what Donald Trump wants to do to solve these problems.
Absolutely. And thanks God, we're back to common sense. But also America played a great leading role abroad. You mentioned to organize a CPAC summit in Poland. What drew you to Poland and how do you think CPAC can influence politics over there?
I mean, it's been truly remarkable. And I give great credit to my husband, Matt, who really was able to see the vision of what was happening in these other countries. And our first partner was with the Japanese Conservative Union. So we held our first CPAC Japan. Oh my goodness, I think we're like 6 or 7 years ago. And then it really started growing into all these different continents. And so I think for CPAC Hungary, which we already are going to be hosting May 30th and 31st, they've been incredible to work with. Viktor Orban is a hero. He's someone who understands the importance of defending his borders, the borders of his country, understanding sovereignty of nation, pushing back against the European Union. You might not agree with everything that Viktor Orban does, but he understands the beauty of Hungarian culture and being able to ensure that the woke ideology and this idea of protecting the family is kept intact. And look, this is what you have to understand. And you know this as in your background is that Europe has suffered under these communist regimes. They know the onslaught, the horrific oppression under communism. And so we need these strong leaders to fight back against the communists. Absolutely. And so in Poland, which is, I think, one of the most prime examples, we have seen that the current Polish government, they've looked to censor Republika, which is their version of Fox News or their version of Newsmax, and try to shut them down so there's no alternative viewpoints. And so it's really disgraceful. And so Matt got to meet with President Duda and the former prime minister as well. And there have been conversations about possibly doing a CPAC Poland. We're still in the process of figuring out what we're going to be doing, which ones we're doing next. We have a lot of countries that have come to us to build out CPACs in their country. And really what it is, it's bringing conservatives together in the region to be able to help, get them with the weapon, I don't want to say the weapons like the weapons, but the sword and shield they need to be able to build their own MAGA movement in their countries. So it's been absolutely fascinating to watch. We, back in December, were in CPAC Japan. I forgot to say CPAC Korea. We did do a CPAC Korea. And then CPAC Argentina, which was a huge success with President Milei and many conservative leaders who came from across that region as well.
And thank you so much for that. Just a last question on this point. Who do you think are some of the key rising stars in the conservative movement abroad?
Oh
key
my
leaders?
goodness, that's a great question. Well, I do think that Eduardo Bolsonaro is truly amazing. He's been a good friend of ours in Brazil for a very long time. You know, Eduardo Verostegui does a lot of great work in Mexico. I think we've seen, you know, President Javier Milei really be a superstar in not only, you know, he's a lot like Trump in the sense that they're these bigger than life personalities, and how he's been able to impact not only the culture in Argentina, but also change the way they do business. I mean, he did Doge before even Doge existed, you know, in Argentina. And then I love Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. I think she is truly one of the biggest talents we have in Europe right now, as well. And she really is a strong leader and someone who understands how to maneuver so much of what we're seeing in Europe, because the European Union is challenging. And so you're seeing these up and coming stars, for example, in France. And you see Robert Fico, who is Slovakian as well, who actually they tried to kill him multiple times. Well, he's coming to CPAC to speak. And you see these leaders rise up. We have one of the top French leaders coming as well, who will be speaking at CPAC. Santiago Abascal from Spain. He is running Patriot Europa as well as running the Vox Party. He is an incredibly charismatic leader in Spain. And so the list, I can tell you, it goes on. And it's just fascinating to watch these individuals really mobilize in their countries to make significant changes.
No, and I think also when Vice President Vance was at the Munich Security Conference, when he, if you want to call it, dressed down our European allies, he was just trying to basically tell them, become a better version of yourselves. Do you want to espouse democracy? Do you want to support Western traditions, values, your culture that made you such a stalwart ally of us, meeting NATO and the European Union? Then act like it. Don't become this weird change that you're pushing down regarding censorship, changing your traditions, open borders. So I truly believe that CPAC has a massive impact in getting these countries back on track and supporting the type of leadership that will work with a leader like President Trump. So based on that, are you seeing pushback from leftist organizations, leftist politicians? Obviously, in Brazil, there was that very famous Supreme Court issue with censorship. I know that they had some issues with Jason Miller, where they detained him
That's right.
at the airport. Are you seeing that at all now with CPAC just around the corner, or have they kind of dissipated in their efforts to stop
you know, whenever we go into these countries, so I'll give you, for example, CPAC Mexico, which at the time was President Obrador, who was there. You know, he made it a point to make it very clear that he knew CPAC was in his country, and he tried to call us a bunch of fascists, right? And so this is very typical. We've had presidents of different countries, like the president of Bolivia, basically, you know, tweet at us, or, you know, or post against us on how CPAC is so far right or whatever. And so so that's when you know if they're talking about you, you know you're having an impact. And we had the case, for example, with a bunch of Brazilian journalists and that had come over to the United States. They came to the CPAC office. They were some of the congressmen as well. And they had told us that they were very afraid that when they go back to Brazil, that they would be thrown into jail. And the censorship was real. And so Matt ended up basically posting on X against the Supreme Court justice that's targeting these conservative leaders, basically saying, listen, we're watching you. And they were able to get back safely into their country. But this is like the fears and the challenges that many of these conservative leaders are facing across the globe. They are definitely being persecuted, not only through the judicial system, but also obviously through the fact that they're being targeted in their countries. And that's a big problem. And so we hope that CPAC can serve as that kind of big brother to help these other conservative leaders know that we have their back. And look, I got to tell you, what's been beautiful in this process is that they've become friends. Like I see how we've gone from one CPAC to the next CPAC, and everyone, the Hungarian knows the Mexican, the Japanese knows the Brazilian, and you start to wonder, wow, this is truly something that's really humbling and amazing. And you have to, and understanding how the communists have worked. The communists for a long time have built out the Foro de Sao Paulo, for example, where they have these communist leaders from across the globe come together. Or you look at Progressive International. I mean, they get very organized in terms of coming up, developing and creating the leftist propaganda, making sure that that's distributed throughout these countries. And there, and it's what's sad to watch is sometimes you see the United States involved in pushing this leftist propaganda. So like Antony Blinken, the Biden administration, for example, going after the conservative leader in Albania, who was thrown into prison by the socialist government. And so it is very, this is why the exposure of like USAID and where the money's going to and what NGOs are they supporting. I mean, they support the Clinton Foundation, they support George Soros, Bill Gates. I mean, these are big globalists who basically stand against everything we stand for. And they have to be exposed because it's been billions of dollars in the pockets of these NGOs and these organizations to basically push a leftist propaganda. And it's why it has to be dismantled. And it's why you're seeing the effectiveness of Doge and as we move forward.
Well, CPAC is about to start tomorrow. Now I'm sure the atmosphere will be electric under President Trump presidency. What can anticipate about the new summit of CPAC about to start?
Well, this CPAC, I think, is going to be just so fascinating because it's so celebratory, right? It's these people who have struggled so much, who have put everything on the line to try to get to the finish line and win. And it's so many of our grassroots activists, not only here in the United States, but we're having delegations come from across the globe. So we are launching with the CPAC International Summit, as you mentioned. And then following that, we go straight into having these incredible speakers that from Vice President J.D. Vance to many of the cabinet members who are coming. We have Secretary Kristi Noem, who's going to be at the Reagan dinner and giving a speech there. We have Secretary Chris Wright, who is the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Doug Burgum, Scott Turner. The list goes on in terms of so many of our cabinet members. And then we're going to have an interesting mix of top business leaders as well. We have one of the top Bitcoin strategists that we've ever met, Michael Saylor, who's going to be joining us. We have some also just even actors like Dean Cain, Mike Rowe, who's going to be with us as well. So it is a complete mix of kind of culture, politics, business, but this shows how expansive the MAGA movement has become. And it's just, I think, so fascinating to watch to see how CPAC continues to expand. And then we've got obviously these international leaders who are going to be part of the CPAC. We have President Javier Milei speaking and several others who, as we mentioned, would be joining us as well.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it.
One last question for me, Mercedes. You're a master strategist. You obviously have been working with President Trump in the White House, and you're running the greatest conservative conference in the world. So looking into the future and future conservative leaders, or even present conservative leaders, a question I have is, what makes a great conservative leader today? Whether you're a young man or woman, or whether you're an older person, right. What is the secret sauce to making that person a great candidate for the future in the conservative movement?
Wow, that's such a great question. I think that the key is to listen to God's will. Mm-hmm. I think it is understanding that when you submit to God's will and you ask God, what do you need of me to be? Is it to be at home raising my kids? Is it for me to run for school board? Is it me, to get together with my beautiful wife or my handsome husband and do a podcast? We're all given a role to play during our time on earth. And so I find that the best conservative leaders are those who are humble, who listen to God's will, and who know that the battle is much greater than themselves. If they are doing it for themselves or to get a powerful position, it won't work. But if you do it because it is the right thing to do, because you need to have your sword and shield, and you know that you have to come here to protect your family and to fight for your country and to ensure that we spread truth and goodness throughout the globe, then you're on the right track. So, you know, God gives us very different talents. Some of them is to communicate or to be a strategist, or others is to write a lot of policy. Others is to teach children. And, you know, it really is different for every single person. And the key is just to make sure that we fulfill that role as we move, and ensure that understanding that while we celebrate today, and yes, it is a wonderful victory, that the fight continues every single day, that we cannot, you know, take our foot off the pedal because you could quickly go back to a point that you could lose this great country. And I do believe this country is very much blessed by God. And we have an obligation on our term on earth here to ensure that we're able to pass the values of this country and the greatness of this country to our children and grandchildren. And that's the best we can do.
Thanks so much for such an inspiring and powerful conversation, and for everything you're doing for America and for the world. We are honored you joined Global View, where people can keep up with your great initiatives.
Thank you. Well, I'm at Mercedes Schlapp on X, on Instagram, also at CPAC to get all the latest news and to make sure you're following what we're doing at CPAC. And the way we view it is we love this conference. It's one of the best conferences out there to be able to connect. I know a lot of people who have met their husband or wife at CPAC. And so if you're single, definitely, you know, it's a great place to be. But it's only part of what we do every day. And, you know, we are traveling across the globe. We're continuing to expand our reach and ensure that we're able to fight against the communists, make sure that the right agenda is in place for here in the US and across the globe to ensure that Americans and others, you know, are able to live freely. And that is going to be our mission as we continue forward.
Thank you again. It was an honor to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Thank you for having me.